The ferry came in at low tide, which made the gangway steep, and the water below it the color of old pewter. Dunvara's wharf had seen better seasons. The bollards were furred with barnacles to the waterline, and 3 of the dock cleats on the eastern run were so far gone with rot that a man stepping onto them in the dark would have gone straight through. She noticed all of this before she noticed the town. There was only one other passenger who got off at Dunvara, a man with a crate of hardware who was met by his wife and loaded into a wagon before the ferry had finished tying off. After that, it was just her, with her canvas bag over one shoulder and her father's old caulking roll tucked under her arm, the tools inside it wrapped in oilcloth against the salt air. She had come up from Newfoundland on the overnight run. She had not slept. The wharf master, a stout man with a gray beard and a manner suggesting he had been interrupted, looked at her, then at the caulking roll, then back at her. He said, "You looking for someone?" She said, "The McCrae yard." He pointed without speaking and went back inside. The yard sat at the northern end of the harbor, set back from the water behind a row of upturned dories. It was a working place, not a pretty one. A low building with a corrugated tin roof, stacks of timber under canvas, a ways and cradle with a schooner hauled up on it. The hull planking visible from here, white and blistered where the paint had lifted. She could see from 40 yards that the garboard seam had opened. She could see it the way her father had taught her to see it, not looking for it exactly, but registering it the way you register a wrong note in a familiar song, involuntarily, completely. There was a man standing at the corner of the building. He was perhaps 35, with the particular build of someone who has done heavy labor for a long time and carries it without thinking about it. His left hand was bandaged from the knuckles to mid-forearm, not neatly but practically, with strips of linen that had been done by someone who knew what they were doing and had done it in a hurry. His right hand held a tin mug. He was watching her walk up from the wharf, the way people watch something unexpected, when they have not yet decided what to make of it. She stopped in front of him. She looked at the schooner on the cradle. He said, "I wrote to the Guildhall in Sydney." She said, "I know, I'm who they sent." He had not expected this, or if he had not resolved it. He looked at her caulking roll, the oilcloth exterior gone dark from years of handling. He looked at the schooner. 2 fingers, he said, meaning the bandaged hand. He had caught it in a mooring winch 3 weeks ago. The doctor in Baddeck had set what could be set, and told him the rest would follow in time, which was a doctor's way of saying that lifting, gripping, driving a caulking iron, none of it was possible for the next 2 months. The schooner needed to be back in the water before the September herring run. Without the herring run, there was no income through winter. Room and board, he said, the loft above the sail locker, no wages. She looked at the garboard seam again. She looked at the deck, running her eye along the center line where the seams would be worst. She was doing calculations that had nothing to do with numbers. She said yes. The loft above the sail locker smelled of mildew and pine resin, and when the wind came off the water, it whistled through a gap in the sheathing on the north wall that no one had thought to address. There was a cot, a washstand, a small oil lamp on an upturned crate, and a window that faced east across the harbor mouth. Through it she could see the lighthouse on the point, and beyond it, the gray line of the Atlantic. She set her caulking roll on the crate. She did not unpack her bag. Below her, through the loft floor, she heard the evening sounds of the yard. A fire lit, the low sound of a man moving through a familiar space in the dark. Then a child's voice, clear and near the base of the loft ladder, asking something she couldn't make out. His answer too quiet to hear. Then nothing for a long while except the ordinary sounds of supper, and after it, silence. She lay on the cot and listened to the foghorn at the harbor entrance, one long note every 2 minutes. She had grown up listening to foghorns. They had always seemed to her less like warnings than like questions. Are you still there? Are you still there? She was 31 years old. She had caulked boats in Harbour Grace, in Lunenburg, in Pictou, and once in a yard outside Quebec City, where she had not been able to make herself understood and had finished the job in 12 days and left without ceremony. She had her father's roll and her father's tools and the way her father had stood in front of a hull and read it. The slight tilt of the head, The half-squint that was not from the sun but from concentration. He had been dead for 4 years. She was up before the light touched the harbor. She unwrapped the caulking irons by feel, set them in order on the crate, making iron, reefing iron, spike, and carried the oakum and the mallet down the loft ladder without making a sound. The yard was dark except for a lamp burning in the low window of the house at the back of the property. She set up her materials at the garboard seam on the port side and began. The work was straightforward, in the way that honest work is always straightforward. It told you what it needed, and you gave it that and nothing else. She raked the old caulking out of the seam first, working methodically, clearing what was soft and black with rot and leaving what still held. Then she twisted the oakum into a continuous strand between her palms, not too tight or it would not compress when driven, and she began laying it into the seam with the making iron. She was 3 feet into the port garboard when the girl appeared. She did not hear her coming. One moment the yard was empty, and the next the girl was standing at the foot of the cradle, looking up with an expression that was simply attentive. Not shy, not performing boldness, just watching the way a child watches when she has decided that watching is sufficient for now. She was perhaps 8, in a gray wool coat she had likely had for 2 winters, her hair in a single braid that had already begun to come loose, bare feet in the yard shavings. She kept working. After a moment she said, "You'll want shoes. The shavings have nails in them." The girl looked down at the ground around the cradle, then back up. "What's that you're putting in?" "Oakum, hemp fiber twisted." She held up a length of it goes in the seam between the planks. "What for?" "To keep the water out." She laid another loop into the seam and picked up the mallet. "When I drive it in, it swells, seals the gap." The girl thought about this. "Can I see?" She drove the iron 3 times, short controlled strokes, seeding the oakum. The sound was a clean, flat knock that came back off the hull in a way she had always found satisfying. Not an echo exactly, more like a confirmation. Girl was still watching when he appeared at the corner of the building. He was in his work clothes, mug in his good hand. He had come to see what the noise was, or he had been awake already and come to see what the morning looked like, or both. He stood at the corner and did not say anything. The girl had not noticed him. She drove another sequence of blows, moved the iron to the right, drove again. "My doc can't do that," the girl said, his hand. "No." "Were you trained to?" "By my father." She paused to retwist a section of oakum. "He built boats. I handed him tools until I was old enough to use them." The girl absorbed this. She looked at the hull, then at the iron. "Can I try?" "Not yet. It has to be right the first time. It's easier to show you than to fix a mistake." She had not looked toward the corner of the building, but she was aware of him standing there, the way you are aware of a shift in light. He watched for perhaps 2 minutes. Then he went back inside. He said nothing about it at supper. She had not expected him to. He set a plate down and sat across from his daughter and listened to her talk about something that had happened at school. He glanced up occasionally, and when he did not look at her. She ate and looked at the window and said nothing. And after supper, she went back up to the loft. The girl's name, she learned, was Agnes. She learned it the 3rd evening when he called from the yard and the girl sprang up from the gunwale of the upturned skiff where she'd been sitting and ran across the yard with her coat open and her braid fully undone, not answering until she reached the door. Agnes, a plain name, a name that suited someone who did not see the point in ornament. By the 9th day, she had found her sequence. She worked the seams from the garboard up, port side to starboard, keeping her courses consistent. She drove the oakum until the iron gave her back the right note. Not hollow, not over tight, the particular resistance of compressed hemp in sound wood, and she moved on. She did not rush. Her father had told her once that rushing caulking was like rushing an argument. You might think you had finished, but you had not, and you would hear about it later, usually in the worst possible weather. On the 10th morning, she was working the deck seams 4 of the mast when she felt him watching from the yard below. She set a run of oakum, picked up the mallet, drove the iron. The sound came back clean. She moved to the next seam. She had been keeping track, without meaning to, of a particular quality in his stillness whenever she was working overhead. A faint tension, a held breath. The way a person braces when they are not certain the next sound will be the right one. She had understood it on the second day. He had seen bad work before. He was listening to hear if hers was. By the afternoon of the 10th day, the tension had gone out of his stillness. He stood in the yard and watched without bracing. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. She had noticed the dock cleats on her second morning in Dunvara, walking to the water pump at the end of the eastern run. 3 of them were gone soft with rot at the bolts. Someone had painted over them. A coat of gray applied recently enough that the color was still even, not yet weathered to match the rest, but paint over rot is not repair. It is a question being deferred. She looked at the cleats. She kept walking, but she measured them as she went, the way her father had measured things without stopping. Length, set of the bolt pattern, the depth of the rot by the give of the wood when her foot found it. He had believed that a person who needed to kneel down and look closely at everything was still learning to see. She was still learning always, but she had learned enough. On a Sunday morning when the yard was quiet and the harbor still and the church bell had already rung its first call, she went down to the eastern run with a pry bar, 3 new hardwood cleats she had cut from scrap lumber the evening before, and her bolt bag. She worked without haste. She freed the first rotten cleat in 2 minutes. The bolts came out almost without resistance, and set the new one, drilled clean and fitted tight, and drove the bolts home. She moved to the second. She was fitting the third when she heard feet on the wharf planking behind her. The woman from the dry goods store, a lean woman in her 60s who had watched her from the doorway twice without speaking, was standing 15 feet away with a market basket on her arm. She had come early to open up, or she had seen someone working the wharf and wanted to know who. She looked at what had been replaced and what was being finished. Then she looked at the woman crouching over the last cleat with a bolt driver. Neither of them spoke. A gull crossed the harbor low and fast and was gone. The woman from the dry goods store set her basket down and went inside. The sound of the bolt going home was quiet in the still morning air. She collected her tools and the scraps of rotten wood she had pulled out, and she was lashing them together for burning when the store door opened again. The woman set a mug of tea on the new cleat and went back inside without speaking. She looked at the mug. The cleat beneath it was hardwood, tight-grained, mortised flush to the dock stringer. She picked it up with both hands and drank the tea where she stood, looking out across the harbor where the fog was lifting off the water in long, thin sheets. The rain came in the second week of September, a slow, steady rain off the Atlantic that settled in for 3 days and showed no intention of leaving. She could not work the deck in the rain. Driving wet oakum into wet seams was work undone. So she came down from the schooner and sat in the sail locker with her father's tools spread out on the floor and attended to them. She cleaned and sharpened each iron in sequence, checked the handles for looseness, worked a thin coat of linseed into the mallet head. The tools were not new. They had been new when her father was young. They had his initials cut into each handle, small and plain, and she had never thought to remove them. She was fitting a new wedge into the reefing iron's handle when he came through the locker door with his coat dark at the shoulders from the rain. He crossed to his bench without speaking, the way he moved through any space he knew well, directly, without looking for permission. He set down what he was carrying and began sorting through a box of fittings. She kept working. A minute passed, perhaps 2, then she heard him stop moving. She did not look up. She kept her hands on the iron, fitting the wedge, tapping it with the mallet to seat it. He was looking at what was laid out on the floor, not cataloging it. She had the sense he had seen all of this before, or something very like it, and was not surprised by the tools themselves. He was reading something else. She could not have said what. After a moment, he crossed to the small stove in the corner and put the kettle on without asking. She fit the last wedge. She tested the handle for play and found none. He brought 2 mugs. He set hers on the floor beside her right hand, within reach but not in the way, and went back to his bench. She left it there for a moment and then picked it up. The tea was strong the way her father had made it, strong enough to stand up to cold air and early mornings. And she drank it and listened to the rain on the tin roof above them and said nothing. And he said nothing, and neither of them needed to. Agnes came and went through those rainy days like weather. She appeared at the sail locker door mid-morning with a cloth folded over a plate, cornbread, still warm, and 2 hard-boiled eggs, and set it on the floor inside the door and disappeared again before she could say anything. That afternoon she was back, sitting cross-legged on a coil of rope, watching the tools get cleaned with the same unhurried attention she gave to everything. "My mother knew boats too," Agnes said after a while. "She kept working, is that right? She grew up on the shore, past Ingonish. She knew the names of all the boats in the harbor here." "Did she?" "She died when I was 4. She said it the way children sometimes say hard things, plainly, without performance, because the fact had been absorbed so long ago that it lived now in the same register as other facts. Dad doesn't talk about her much, but sometimes I can tell he's thinking about her because he gets quiet in a different way." She wrapped a cleaned iron in its cloth and set it aside. She reached for the next one. "You get quiet in a different way too," Agnes said. "When you're working really hard, it's a good kind of quiet." She did not answer. She kept her hands moving. After a moment, the girl picked up a length of leftover oakum from the floor and turned it in her fingers. "Are you going to stay? After the boat's done?" She was not sure how to answer a question she had not yet answered for herself. She said, "I'll stay until the work is done." "And after?" She looked at the iron in her hands. She looked at the tools laid out on the floor around her, each one in its place, each one her father's. "I don't know," she said, and meant it. Agnes seemed to accept this. She set the oakum down and watched her work. The schoolhouse stood at the south end of the main road, its foundation flagstone and its walls unpainted board and batten that had weathered to silver. She had noticed the step on her 3rd day in town. The second tread from the top had a crack running diagonal across it, the kind that begins as a nuisance in autumn and becomes a broken ankle in January when ice works into it and the wood fails without warning. She came back on a morning when school was not in session. She brought a half-length of hardwood from the scrap pile, her handsaw, and a pot of marine compound. She freed the old tread. It came apart in 2 pieces and fitted the new one, trimming it to match the risers and packing the joints with compound against the coming wet. The fit required 3 passes with the block plane. She counted them before the tread seated without rock. The teacher, a broad-shouldered man named Parrish, somewhere in his 40s, with a face that had learned to hold its conclusions until all the evidence was in, came around the corner of the building while she was collecting her tools. He looked at the step. He set his boot on it and put his full weight on it. The way a careful person tests a thing they are not certain of. Nothing moved. He said, "Who sent you?" She said, "No one." He pressed his boot down a second time, still nothing. He said, "The 3rd tread's been soft for 2 winters." She looked at the 3rd tread. She had looked at it. "That one's not urgent, another season." He studied her for a moment. Then he went inside without offering anything further. She was halfway down the road when she heard the door open behind her. She kept walking, but she counted the days as she went, the way she had stopped trying not to. 22. The schooner had 3 sections of deck seam left. She set the last iron down on a Wednesday morning at 9:30. The mallet came down on the seam, the iron gave back the right note, and then there was nothing left to drive. She sat back on her heels and looked at the seams running fore and aft, even, consistent, done. Below her, Dunvara was going about its morning. The dry goods store had opened. Smoke was coming from the bakehouse 2 doors down. A man she did not know was walking a horse along the road at the back of the harbor, and the horse's shoes made a clear sound on the gravel in the still morning air. She could see the eastern dock from here. The new cleats had gone through 8 days of tidal traffic. They had not moved. She stayed on the deck. Her bag was in the loft. She had not packed it. She had thought about it in the evenings, sitting on the cot with the harbor in the window, and her father's tools rolled in their oilcloth on the crate. She had thought about Pictou, where there was a yard she knew, and a foreman who had told her she could come back when there was room. She had thought about the ferry south, and about the cost of a ticket to the mainland, and about what it meant to keep moving, and what it meant when you stopped. She had not packed the bag. The schooner's hull ran away from her on both sides, tight and sound, the seams dark with oakum, the September light working across the finished deck. 31 courses of caulking port and starboard, the mast partner seam refitted by feel, 3 dock cleats replaced, a schoolhouse step cut true. She had done all of this, and now it was done, and the harbor below her was doing what it always did, and she felt no particular urgency to move. She heard the yard gate. She heard his boots on the gravel, the particular sound of them, the particular weight she had learned to recognize over 22 days, unhurried, covering the distance at the pace the distance required. He came up the cradle ladder and stepped onto the deck, and she heard him reading the seams the same way she had read them. The slight pause that was not hesitation but attention, the careful eye moving over the work. He had not asked to see it. He had simply come. He stopped beside her. He looked fore, then aft, then at the mast partners. She waited. He said Parrish came by yesterday. She looked at the harbor. He said the steps holding. It'll hold. He was quiet for a moment. The foghorn at the lighthouse spoke once, low and even across the harbor mouth. He had his good hand in his coat pocket. The bandaged hand was at his side, and he moved it with slightly more ease than he had 3 weeks ago, which meant the bones were knitting the way they were supposed to. She had noticed this without remarking on it. She noticed most things without remarking on them. He said, the herring run starts Friday. I know. She'll be ready. She'll be ready. He looked at the deck seam nearest his boot. He set his boot against it. The way you test a thing you believe in but want to be certain of, and the seam did not move, and nothing gave, because nothing was going to give. The oakum was set right, and the compound had cured, and the wood was sound. She had seen to that. Agnes appeared at the bottom of the cradle, looking up at them both in her coat that was too big at the wrists and her braid half come undone. She did not call up. She simply stood and looked, the way she had looked on the first morning, assessing without judgment. He glanced down at her. Something passed between them that she did not have the full view of. A slight shift in his face, and the girl's answering nod. And then Agnes turned and went back toward the house, in that unhurried direction change she had. He looked back out at the harbor. He did not ask her anything. He did not offer anything. He simply stood there on the finished deck with his injured hand at his side and his good hand in his pocket and the September light working across the water below them. And she sat where she was with the caulking iron laid across her knees and her father's mallet beside it, and the whole of Dunvara Harbour spread out in front of her. She thought about the ferry south. She thought about Pictou. She thought about what her father had said once, near the end, when she had asked him how you knew when a boat was done. He had thought about it for a moment. He always thought before he answered, which was one of the things she had loved about him. And then he said, you know by the sound. When you drive the last nail and the wood gives back the right answer, you know. She had been 19. She had not entirely understood him then. She understood him now. The bag was in the loft. It was not packed. The foghorn spoke again, one long note, even impatient, not a warning. She put both hands flat on the deck, on either side of her, and felt what the morning sun had worked into the cedar. The particular warmth of sound timber that has been fitted right and caulked tight and will hold what it is meant to hold for a long time to come. Below them, the harbor went about its business. The tide was coming in. You could see it in the way the moored boats had begun to lift and settle, each one finding its natural lie in the water, the way things find their natural lie when the conditions are right. She did not pick up her bag. The morning opened.